Yo, 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 ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another In the OT podcast for BetHubb Sports Blog.com. The big news has finally come out of the NHL as the two most coveted free agents in this year's offseason, Zach Parise and Ryan Suter, have decided to make their announcements today on Independence Day in the United States, which is extremely fitting based on the fact that they're both two of the better American hockey players in the league and are going to an American team together. That is, of course, the Minnesota Wild. It is a homecoming of sorts, especially for Zach Parise, who grew up there when his father, J.P. Parise, played for the Minnesota North Stars back in the day, and his good friend Ryan Suter from neighboring state Wisconsin. Both of them signed identical 13-year, $98 million contracts, and there's a couple things we need to break down in regards to the way this is going to affect the Minnesota Wild team moving forward and the way it affects the rest of the NHL. But before we get into that it's a relief that this has finally actually occurred, because I do believe that so many of these teams that were in pursuit of these two key free agents had all of their off-season plans surrounded by that, and now they have to move into some of their plan Bs and Cs and contingencies, and we can now start to see a bit of a domino effect and let everything fall into place. Now, from a team standpoint here, Minnesota is definitely going to be an improved hockey team, but did they pay too much? That's the biggest question, and I happen to believe they definitely did. And we'll start with Ryan Suter, who I believe is vastly overrated due to the fact that a lot of his success was a byproduct of playing with Shea Weber in Nashville, who is one of the best defensemen in the NHL, a year in, year out Norris Trophy candidate, and Ryan Suter is definitely not that. I don't think he has the same offensive ability as Weber, and I don't think he's quite as physical in his own end either. Now, don't get me wrong, Ryan Suter is a good defenseman, but I wouldn't go out there and say he's an elite defenseman. I wouldn't rank him in the top 5, 6, 7, 8 defensemen in the NHL. And if you're going to go out there and offer someone $100 million, you better best believe that they are going to be considered an elite defenseman. Obviously, Fletcher isn't going to come out and say that in Minnesota, and you know that for this Wild organization here, this was more to do with wanting to, get a little bit of mojo back in the town of Minneapolis. It's a very proud hockey town, very proud hockey state. They're very loyal fans there. It's one of the better U.S. Markets, given how small the city is in relation to some of the other bigger markets like Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, and they're very passionate there. So if they were going to go to another city outside of the teams they were previously on, I'm glad it is with Minnesota. Now, Parise, I do believe there's a little bit more value in the contract there, because this guy's an absolute stud. And I know the last couple of years have been very challenging for him due to the fact that he came off the torn ACL. But prior to that, he was a top 10 scorer year in, year out. He was an elite forward, and I believe that he will be able to get back on track with that. Now, the issue here for Minnesota is by giving out all this money here, it really does limit what else they can do in terms of bringing in other players. And when you look at their roster from last year, it surely wasn't that special, as they missed the playoffs by a long shot. And that comes after them leading the NHL all the way up until about the middle of December. And for Parise, when he did play in New Jersey, he had much better offensive players surrounding him. And in Nashville, Suter had much better defensive players and a better overall team system that he played in. So it might be a little bit far-fetched to believe these players can live up to those expectations in terms of what they previously produced. Now, especially when you look at Minnesota offensively, there's so many question marks. The really only other reliable forward up there is Mikko Koivu, who's a very good two-way player. Is Danny Heatley ever going to get back on track? I say no. This guy's lazy. He's a mouthpiece. He's got attitude issues. And when he's making $6.5, $7 million a year, and you're going to get your 25 goals and 58 points, and he's a minus player, that ain't good enough. Devin Setoguchi has done nothing since a couple years ago when he had all those goals playing with Joe Thornton. Pierre-Marc Bouchard is always injured. You don't know what you're getting out of him. And the only other guy who's maybe a good two-way player, but is obviously more of a role player, is Matt Cullen. Other than that, what are they expecting up front from guys like Kyle Brodziak and Cal Clutterbuck? These guys are grinder. You can't expect much out of them, and they're still going to have offensive problems even with Parise thrown into the mix. And then defensively, as good as Ryan Suter is, who else is he surrounded by? Tom Gilbert, okay, sure, he's okay, but is that someone you want to rely on, your top pairing with them? That guy could maybe be a third or fourth defenseman. Then after that, they're relying on guys like Clayton Stoner and Steven Kampfer and Marco Scandella and Jared Spurgeon and Justin Falk. We're talking about a bunch of no-namers that clearly are not capable of being in the top four. So this team lacks a lot of depth. They're going to have to put extra minutes on Suter. He won't have the luxury of Weber being on his side with them. And I still say that even with these transactions today, they're 50-50 to make the playoffs at best, and they're very far away from competing for a Stanley Cup. The only chance they'd ever have at that happening is Nicholas Backstrom getting back to his all-star form and standing on his head. He's 34 years old. He ain't getting any younger, and he's surely not going to get any better than he once was. So I don't know why they would want to go completely balls out and make contracts this large for a team that isn't even close to contending. If you're going to go out there and bring in players of this ilk, you better best believe that this team's already made the playoffs a couple years in a row, and they need that one extra piece in order to contend for the cup. You don't go out and invest $200 million to maybe make the playoffs. It's nothing more than just trying to keep the fans happy and trying to make some noise in the city of Minneapolis, and this can come back to dearly haunt this Minnesota Wild organization long term. Now, that's the way I see it from the Wild team perspective. Now, from the league perspective, what I don't understand here is how much of a joke the inconsistency remains in this league. It was only a couple summers ago that Ilya Kovalchuk signed his $100 million contract with the New Jersey Devils that had everybody up in arms about how Lou Lamoriello circumvented the cap, the way it was front-loaded in the back end of the deal. It was only a couple $1 million for the last few years, and they knew that he was going to retire. They made them change the contract. They were going to investigate other deals like the Richards deal and the Luongo deal. Well, what do you know? Here we are 2 years later, and the same BS occurs. How on earth do they have it structured that Parise and Suter with the exact same contracts make $12 million this year, $12 million the year after, $11 million in 2014-15, $9 million all the way down to $8 million from 2015 to 2020, and then 2022 to 2025 making $2 and $1 million a year. It is the exact same formula, the exact same format that everyone went berserk over, but yet this is allowed to happen. And the NHL wonders why they have potentially 3 lockouts coming up here in 15 years, because it's the stupidity by Gary Bettman and the owners to not have consistency with the way these rulings are. Personally, I don't have a problem with it. They're doing nothing illegal within the actual law of the CBA. But if they're going to make a whole hoopla about it a couple summers ago and make Kovalchuk redo his deal, then why is this allowed to be done now? Did they not have some sort of precedent that was set? It just seems like they continue to spin their wheels with all of these contracts here in the league. How hard is it to have a structure put in place, like I've been saying for years, that within a time frame of a contract, there cannot be a certain amount of gap between how much they make in the maximum year and the minimum year. There should also be a maximum in terms of how many years the contract should be as well, and then you eliminate all this confusion. It's just unbelievable. You'd think that you need some sort of brilliant people to be putting this together here when it doesn't actually require that if they use their brains a little bit. Anyways, that's the way I see it all breaking down here with the big contracts today. Chad here with another In the OT podcast, BetHubbSportsBlog.com.